In an old tailor shop nestled between two busy stores, a young seamstress worked tirelessly to support her younger sister. One chilly afternoon, as the sound of scissors and fabric filled the air, she noticed something strange happening across the street. An elderly man, looking out of place, was being escorted out of a local cafe, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Without thinking, she hurried inside, purchased 2 cups of coffee, and offered him one. What seemed like a small, simple gesture would soon lead them to an unlikely but deep friendship. When she learned of his estranged son, she decided to help him reconnect, an act that would forever change their lives. But before we delve further, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it in your corner of the world? The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the modest shop, casting long shadows across the workbench. Emma Davis, 28, bent over the sewing machine, her hands steady and sure. Her fingers moved with the same precision her grandfather Charles had taught her years ago when she was just a young girl, heartbroken and adrift after losing her parents. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it means everything, Emma, his voice echoed in her memory. Those words, simple yet powerful, stayed with her always. A soft bell chimed above the door, and Emma looked up to see Mrs. Robinson, a frequent customer, shuffle inside with a worn-out coat in hand. Her kind, weathered face lit up when she saw Emma, a warmth Emma had come to know well. "Emma, darling, I need your magic again," Mrs. Robinson smiled, showing her a coat that had seen better days. Emma assessed it quickly. The fabric was beyond saving, but she knew this coat meant more than warmth to Mrs. Robinson. The elderly woman lived alone and could barely afford a new jacket. "I'll take care of it," Emma assured, smiling gently. "No charge." Mrs. Robinson's eyes filled with tears. "You can't keep giving your work away for free, Emma. How do you survive?" Emma glanced at the cluttered shop around her. Her grandfather's legacy, photos on the wall of him as a young man learning tailoring, starting his shop in 1985, and teaching Emma how to thread a needle. In every picture, his face was alight with kindness, hands that had mended countless garments, and just as many broken hearts. "Things manage, Mrs. Robinson," Emma replied softly, though the stack of overdue bills on her desk told a different story. After Mrs. Robinson left, Emma locked the door behind her and set the sign to closed. The walk back to her small apartment took her past the neighborhood cafe, the Corner Cup. Through the windows, she could see the usual crowd, students with textbooks, professionals glued to laptops, and there, in the same corner booth by the window, an elderly man sat. She'd noticed him for months, sitting alone, a black coffee and yesterday's newspaper always in front of him. He always seemed so quiet, so isolated. Emma had wondered about him many times, but in a place like this, curiosity often went unspoken. At home, Emma found her 17-year-old sister, Lily, sprawled across the couch, textbooks scattered like confetti around her. "How was school?" Emma asked as she hung her jacket up. "Same as always," Lily answered, not looking up. "But Maya, we got the letter." Emma's stomach churned. She knew which letter it was. The one from the community college. The one that held Lily's future. The deposit was due by Friday, $1,500. Emma sat down, the weight of the number pressing her down. $1,500 felt like $1 million. With the shop's rent, utilities, and what little she could scrape together, she had nothing close to that. "We'll figure it out," Emma said, though it felt more like an empty promise. Lily finally looked up, her gaze steady and knowing. "Maybe I should just get a job and help with the shop then?" Emma's heart tightened. "No, you're going to college," she insisted, her voice sharper than she intended. "That's not up for debate." "But Emma, Samuel didn't give up everything for us just so I could hem pants for a living." Emma softened. "You're brilliant, Lily. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of a ticking clock too loud in the silence. She tried to calculate how to make the numbers work, but they wouldn't balance no matter what. Samuel's voice floated through her mind. "Baby girl, when the road gets dark, just keep walking toward the light. It'll show up when you need it most." Emma hoped he was right. The next morning, she was up at 5:30, 2 hours before the shop opened. She used the quiet time to catch up on detailed work, repairs that required patience and skill. But there was a knot in her stomach, growing tighter since the conversation with Lily. The shop's old radio crackled to life with the news of a CEO searching for his missing father, a man presumed dead after a car accident 5 years ago. Emma barely listened as she focused on the delicate stitching for a customer's dress. When she opened the shop at 7:30, the first customers trickled in. By noon, Emma had earned just enough to cover her costs for the day. It wasn't much, but it was something. As she was preparing to close for lunch, she saw him again, the old man from the cafe. He was walking slowly down the sidewalk, his movements careful and deliberate, like he wasn't sure how long his legs would hold him up. His name was Samuel Phillips. He had walked these streets for 5 years, ever since he was released from the hospital after a terrible accident that had taken everything: his wife, his home, and his son, Daniel. Daniel had assumed Samuel was dead, and Samuel had never been able to find him. The grief had broken him, leaving him with nothing but memories and the coldness of being forgotten. The cafe had become his refuge, not because the coffee was good, but because it was warm and filled with people too busy to notice him. Jake Carter, the young barista at the corner cup, was about as sympathetic as a stone. He had been annoyed by Samuel's daily presence for months, his slow consumption of one coffee taking up valuable space during the busy hours. Today he'd had enough. "Sir," Jake said, his tone curt, "this isn't a library. We've got paying customers who need the table." Samuel looked up from his paper, his pale blue eyes filled with an emotion Jake couldn't place. "I bought a coffee," Samuel murmured, his voice frail. "That was hours ago," Jake replied, his patience running thin. "If you want to stay, you'll need to order something else." A hushed silence spread over the cafe. Samuel folded his newspaper and stood up shakily, reaching for his wallet, knowing he barely had enough for another drink. "I'll just go," he said, defeated. Jake watched as Samuel moved toward the door, his steps slow and heavy, like he was walking away from everything he'd ever known. Just as Samuel reached for the door, Emma stepped inside. She had no plan, no intention of getting involved, but something about the man's hunched posture, the way he seemed to shrink into himself, stirred something in her. She walked past Samuel, her gaze steady, and approached the counter. "I'll have 2 coffees and a blueberry muffin, please." Jake gave her a tight-lipped smile, clearly annoyed. "For here or to go?" he asked. Emma glanced back at Samuel, who was still standing by the door, looking lost. "For here," she said. She paid with the little cash she had and carried the tray to Samuel's table. "I'm sorry," Samuel said quietly. "I was just leaving." Emma sat down across from him, offering a warm smile. "Not on my account, I hope." She wrapped her hands around her own cup of coffee, enjoying the warmth of the drink, the simple pleasure of sharing a moment. "I hate drinking alone," Samuel said softly. They sat in silence for a moment before Emma spoke again. "You don't know me," Samuel remarked, looking at her with curiosity. Emma smiled. "True. But my grandfather always said that good coffee tastes better with good company. He always drank his black coffee with a blueberry muffin." Samuel's eyes softened at the mention of the muffin. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Emma said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "He used to say, kindness costs nothing, but means everything." Samuel gave her a long look, as if considering something deep. "And your grandfather," he said slowly, "he taught you well." Emma nodded. "I'm Emma Davis," she said. "Samuel Phillips." The two sat together for an hour, sharing stories. Samuel talked about his days as an engineer, building bridges, both literal and metaphorical. Emma spoke of her shop, of her grandfather's teachings about mending not just clothes, but lives. Neither of them spoke about the sadness they carried. Yet, in this moment of connection, it didn't seem to matter. When Emma finally stood to leave, she smiled at Samuel. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. Samuel looked at her, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in his eyes. "I'd like that," he said softly. The next day, Emma made the walk to the cafe once again. As she entered, she saw Samuel already sitting at their usual table, his newspaper folded neatly beside his untouched coffee. She could see the anxiety on his face as if he were waiting for something or someone. When she sat down, she noticed that he didn't immediately look at her. "You look like a man with something on his mind," she said gently, settling into her chair. Samuel glanced up, a mix of hope and fear in his eyes. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you about my son." Before he could continue, Emma interrupted. "There's something I need to tell you first." She pulled out her phone and showed him the Patterson Technologies website. His son, Daniel, was listed as the CEO. Samuel stared at the screen, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. The website spoke of Daniel's successful career, his charity work, and most heart-wrenching of all, the memorial for his parents. Samuel's heart sank, and Emma could see the emotion overtaking him. "He's looking for you, Samuel," she said softly. The realization hit Samuel like a wave. His son had been searching for him all these years, and yet neither of them had known the other was alive. He sat in silence, the tears welling up in his eyes. "I thought he was lost to me forever," he whispered. Emma reached across the table, her hand resting over his. "Some risks are worth taking," she said, squeezing his hand gently. Later that afternoon, Emma made the call that would change everything. She reached the receptionist at Patterson Technologies, and after explaining her connection, they agreed to put her through to Daniel. The conversation was brief but impactful. She told Daniel the truth. His father was alive, living in a small town, waiting for a chance to connect. The receptionist was skeptical at first, but when Emma spoke of the personal details she knew, she was finally convinced. "I'll call him. I've been looking for him for 5 years." Daniel's voice cracked on the phone. Emma arranged for a meeting at Corner Brew the next afternoon at 2 p.m. She didn't tell Samuel, wanting it to be a surprise. When she arrived, Samuel was already sitting at their usual table, staring at his coffee. He was a man on the verge of hope and fear, but Emma knew this was a moment of change. The door chime jingled, and Samuel's gaze snapped up. His face turned from confusion to recognition in an instant. Standing in the doorway was Daniel, taller than his father, but with the same eyes, the same cautious demeanor. Without a word, Daniel rushed across the room and knelt beside his father's chair. In that moment, their embrace was everything. 5 years of loss, grief, and loneliness melting away in the quiet space of the cafe. Emma quietly slipped away to give them privacy, but before she did, she overheard Samuel whisper, "I thought you were gone. I thought you were dead." Daniel, holding his father tightly, replied, "I thought you were too." Jake, the barista who had unknowingly set this chain of events in motion, watched from behind the counter, tears streaming down his face. The other patrons sat in stunned silence, but this time, it was a respectful silence. Emma left the cafe with a lightness in her heart, her footsteps lighter than they had been in years. As the days passed, the news of Samuel and Daniel's reunion spread quickly through the neighborhood. By Friday, the small local coffee shop had become a landmark for kindness. People would stop by just to hear the story, and Jake, who had once been so indifferent, now treated everyone with newfound respect. But for Emma, things were still far from easy. Her shop's bills piled up, and Lily's tuition deposit still loomed large. Yet, a small part of Emma felt hopeful again. She had witnessed the power of kindness and how it could transform lives, and now, it was her turn to receive that kind of transformation. A few weeks later, Daniel arrived at Emma's shop. "You must be Emma," he said, his smile identical to his father's. He looked around at the small shop filled with the legacy of her grandfather. "I owe you everything," he said. Emma shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Your father's friendship was payment enough." Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her. "I'm offering an investment. Not charity, but an investment in your future, in this shop, in what you're building here." Emma hesitated but opened the envelope. It contained more than just money. It was an offer to expand her business, to grow her shop into something bigger, something that could reach even more people. "What kind of investment?" Emma asked. Daniel smiled, his eyes full of sincerity. "The kind that builds bridges. The kind that turns one small shop into something that helps more people, the way you helped my father." 6 months later, Emma's shop had expanded into the next-door space. She had opened a small sewing school for kids and seniors, teaching them the dying art of tailoring. The original shop was unchanged, but now it was full of life, buzzing with activity, laughter, and community. Lily had received a full scholarship to college, not just for tuition, but for room and board and everything she needed to succeed. Henry, now close to Emma and Lily, flew to California to be with Daniel, but he returned once a month to visit, still a part of their lives. And even Jake, who had once been indifferent, now greeted customers with a newfound kindness, knowing how much it meant to be seen. The neighborhood had learned to value small acts of kindness. In the end, it wasn't just about mending clothes. It was about mending hearts, creating connections that were lasting. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in spring, Emma sat with Henry, Daniel, Lily, and Daniel's young daughter, Sophie. The conversations flowed easily, Henry explaining engineering concepts to Sophie, Daniel and Lily discussing college options, and Emma watching the world she had built come together in a beautiful tapestry of love, kindness, and family. As Emma looked around, she thought about all that had transpired. Samuel's lessons still echoed in her heart. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. And in that moment, she realized that the greatest gift her grandfather had given her wasn't the shop. It was the ability to see people, to make them feel valued, and to build bridges where none had existed before.